We just have this one last piece, and then went through 2 chapters today, and the solo's awesome. So apply job order costing in pricing services. And so I'm probably going to try to give you one of these questions. I think this is really useful just from thinking from a business standpoint. And I can't tell you how many times I've worked with businesses or I've worked with individuals and they lose money because they don't know how to cost their business. I met people who say, oh, I'm just going to charge $20. A good example is if you're an Uber driver. And I'm not knocking anyone who does Uber Eats or Uber driving, but a lot of times they'll tell me, they'll buy a brand new car and they'll tell me, I'm making a ton of money. I make $25 an hour. I'll say, well, have you actually priced your service? And then we'll go through and I'll sit down with them and find out that they have a $500 a month lease and then $300 a month in insurance to pay for the lease because it's a new car. And then they have every day we have to look at their mileage. So their mileage is 50 cents or so a mile, we assume is the cost. And then suddenly we're down to, they're making more like $5 an hour if it's a new car. So it's important not to just look at your top line, but how much it actually costs for you to provide the service. And then you make a decision. A good example is I used to own a recording studio when I was 18, and I didn't know this yet. I was too young, and I owned I'm giving this advice because I think this is more useful than even the course if you're ever trying to get into business. But I spent maybe, I worked my entire life until I was 18. I spent maybe $50,000 on building a recording studio. And at the time, I was charging like $30 or $40 an hour to my clients to record their music. And I thought that was a great deal, but I also had to rent the studio. I had to rent the facility in Hollywood, which cost me $1,000 plus a month. And I had my labor costs, and I had to make sure my equipment stayed up. I had to get new strings and make sure my microphones were serviced and all of that. And at the end of it, after doing it for 2 years, I wasn't really making any money. And I was like, man, I spent a bunch of money on doing a good service. What's going on here? And I calculated my rate, and I was making like $5 an hour for the amount of time I was putting in. And it was because I didn't assume the cost. And I realized that, wow, a lot of people who just tutor, like if you were a tutor in college, you could make more money an hour than I did running a recording studio and bringing in clients, which was much more difficult. And so there's a lot of these kind of jobs where like you might be surprised that your average accountant who owns his business might make a lot more money than the flashy car salesman because of the costs related to the hours associated to the business or whining and dining the customers. So always be really careful with the costs, and that's where pricing your services comes into play. So make sure that you're able to cost each job that you do and apply these costs. So the total cost of your labor and your overhead, like for my example, my overhead would have been all of my machinery, the depreciation of my machinery, my recording equipment, and my rent. How would I apply that to each of the jobs that I did? And then all the labor associated with it too. If I knew this, and that's one of the reasons I went back to college and eventually got to get an accountant, was because if I knew this when I first started my business, I would have made a lot more money and been able to make a lot more business sense. So just if you're ever looking to become an entrepreneur, this is really, really, really useful information. So just make sure you understand that we can price anything and understand the kind of margins we're making even on services.